Welcome to Ancestral Wisdom, where the wisdom of the past guides our future. Today I'm going to talk to you about Baldr's dreams and how to celebrate pagan holidays. So, one of the problems that most modern pagans face is that we don't actually have a tradition that was passed down to us by our parents. We go outside of our most direct cultural influence in order to seek something older. That doesn't apply to everybody. And even those who were brought up in Christian tradition, there are still, of course, a large number of pagan traditions that had been integrated into the Christian tradition. Therefore, most practicing Christians actually have quite a high percentage of pagan traditions that they already practice. But that still leaves the question and the need that many pagans have of transferring over what they already do into a pagan context and then figuring out how to add to that, especially if you have children and you're asking yourself the question, how should I bring my child up as a pagan? What should we do? What are the things that we should act out to enculturate the next generation into the religion or way of thinking, more so, of our ancestors? And so I'd like to begin by talking about, starting a series in which I talk about the different types of holidays and how you can celebrate as a modern pagan. Some of the things that I mentioned are going to be historical, but even though we have extensive historical records of how different pagan traditions throughout the world practiced, the truth is, pagans everywhere practiced differently, and different families practiced differently, and they changed things according to their own needs and their own inclinations. And so the truth is, paganism came from us because we are our ancestors, so we created paganism. And so if we decide, if we feel the inclination to worship or practice in a certain way, well, that's no less real paganism, because if paganism originally came from us and changed and evolved over the course of time, it wouldn't make sense for it not to change and evolve with us to some degree. So we're going to start with uh, one of my interpretations of a phenomenon, and it's something that I haven't seen anywhere, but it makes sense to me, and it's what I do and the way that I think. And it's not a traditional holiday in any normal sense of the word, but an example of the way an individual pagan can take their own interpretation and guide themselves as to how to practice. And hopefully that will give other people the incentive to not be afraid to do something similar. Alright, so one of the most magical moments for me in the year is that first time in the year when you breathe in and you smell autumn on the air. Could be that first night that the temperature drops down low enough. And it could be the cool air. We just had a storm, and so we have a lot of branches lying around with leaves that are drying up. We also had a couple of days of really heavy rain, and then we had a couple of nights of extremely low temperatures for this time of the year. So dead leaves, rain, and cool temperatures. And you would go outside and you'd breathe in and you'd smell the autumn. Usually it doesn't happen this early, but that strange confluence of phenomena allowed it to happen this early. So you smell autumn. And what I think of when I first take a breath of air and I smell autumn is I imagine that to be Baldr's first dream. His first bad dream. In northern mythology, the most important, you could argue, myth cycle is the myth cycle of Baldr's death and rebirth. And the very beginning of that myth cycle is Baldr's bad dream, which foretells the negative, well, it foretells his death. It foretells his death in some ways. And what is the first smell of autumn on the air, if not the first hint that we get of the death of the year? And so, one of of course, Baldr's cycle of death and rebirth has been used to explain and interpret many cycles of death and rebirth on different levels. So that could be the cycle of death and rebirth in terms of the year, the fall to the winter to the spring, which it quite literally follows. It is also used to interpret our own mortality and the death of one generation and the rebirth of the next generation. But it's also used, it can be used to interpret other large cycles. The cycles of death and rebirth of a nation, for example, or a people. And the cycles of death and rebirth within yourself, of your own personality and who you are. Parts of you have to die so that the other parts which have been nourished by your greater knowledge can be reawakened, can be awakened and can come forth, and you can become the next version of yourself. So there are many different ways and different levels that you can interpret this myth. But autumn, this first smell of autumn on the air, which in the last couple of days here where I live, we were able to sense, is the beginning of that cycle. So what do you do at a time like that? As far as I know, and let me know if I'm incorrect, there's no precedent for that. There's no real answer to that question in the literature. But what do I do? Well, first, I go out and I enjoy the air. I make sure I don't hold myself up in the house. I make sure that I go out into nature so that I can be immersed in that. That's the first thing that I do, so that I can feel what is necessary to feel before I think or do anything. Next, and I feel joy in that. And so, does that make sense, to feel joy in the first presentiment of demise? Well, I feel joy without thinking about it. But if I had to think about it, and if I had to intellectualize the reason why I feel joy in the first sign of the decay of the year. In some ways, joy in death. As we said a moment ago, you can't have rebirth unless you have death. And so there's beauty in the process of decay. And if we can see beauty in the process of decay in the autumn, we should be able to transfer that beauty into the process of decay that we experience in our own lives. So one way to, let's say, worship, I don't like the word here, but one way to practice paganism is to think about the decay that you see in your own life, to meditate upon it, and to realize that that decay is necessary. Think about the decay. Think about your loved ones who are getting a little older, and how their decline is actually a beautiful part of the natural process. Think about the parts of you that you might cherish, but they're obsolete now, and they need to be burned off like dead wood. And that their burning off will be beautiful, because it will reveal the new person which can emerge from beneath them. I always like to begin any pagan practice with meditation, just thinking deeply about things that can improve my life. But what after that? How to act? Well, you can take the time to talk to your loved ones about this type of thing, and maybe in the next week, record some of your dreams, and then talk to your loved ones about your dreams. Use it as a time to reflect on the importance of dreams and the interpretations of them. That's one interesting way to practice. You all maybe write your dreams down in a dream journal for a week, and then you come together and you talk about them. Maybe you talk about them. Now, the way that you talk about them might eventually become ensconced in ritual. So maybe you talk about them, you choose one day, and you talk about them over a barbecue or a campfire. Maybe you go on a camping trip and you choose that first night around the fire to talk about your dreams. That's a possibility. Another thing that you can do is, whenever the cycle of death and rebirth rears its head, it's important to know that you need strength in order to forge your way through death. It's not easy to defeat the winter spirits. And so you could celebrate the very beginning intimations of that process by holding a strength contest with your friends. And you could call that strength contest Baldr's Dreams, or something romantic like that if you like, but use it as a way to begin the preparations for something that might be difficult. It's not so crazy to think that our ancestors might have done that, given that in the past, without modern luxury, it was even more difficult to get through a harsh winter. So making sure that you're strong, making sure you've been eating well, and you have enough body weight to be able to get through any lean time that might be ahead, enough strength to be able to do any hard labor that the winter might require of you. Those are a few ideas, a few things that you can do to celebrate the first premonition of Baldr in the comment section below. If you have any either historical knowledge of ways that our ancestors celebrated the beginning of the Baldr myth cycle, feel free to leave those so that we can all learn from them. And if you have anything new, any ideas as to the best way to celebrate the beginning of this myth cycle that are not historical, again, feel free to leave those in the comments below so that we can all share in wisdom. Because, again, ancestral wisdom is wisdom that not only comes from the past, but any wisdom that comes from us is ancestral wisdom, because we are our ancestors. He who stirs us Ansus raido kenas Gibon johagalas Naudisi saera You was bethro helgas So hilo tiwas Percano he womana Agus invas degas